Hi and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about how to stop hating yourself. Now, if you are stuck in a painful cycle of self-criticism, comparing, negatively judging yourself, well, you are not alone. Many of our clients suffer with this problem and it's ruining their life. So in this teaching, we'll be explaining where this self-hatred and self-loathing comes from, how your inner child is involved, and the steps you can take to break this self-harming cycle once and for all. Okay, David, so in your experience with clients, where does this self-hatred and self-loathing begin?
Well, it normally starts in childhood. It normally starts at that crucial age that I often talk about when we're doing the inner child work, between the ages of 6 years old and 9 years old, around that time. And something is happening in your environment as a child that really changes the way you think. And this question really highlights one thing: never underestimate the power of your inner child, because it can really lead you down a path that creates very unhealthy and circumstances in your life when you do something and think things about yourself that the one part of you knows is absolutely ridiculous and you almost can't believe you're doing it, yet this other part of you is so strong, so determined, so forceful in this self-loathing and this self-doubt and this self-hatred that we call CCJ.
So you're right that as an adult, of course, we know it's completely unhealthy, unhelpful to be constantly down on ourselves, constantly hating ourselves. But as you say, there's a part of us, part of our adult self, which you call the inner child, that part of our mind, that is doing this hating, this criticism. But what's the connection between, say, what happened to us in childhood? If you can give some examples of what might have happened to us in childhood that may be causing our inner child now to be hating ourselves.
Well, let's just clarify what we mean by CCJ for those new listeners. CCJ, we mean criticising, comparing, or being judgmental. And in my experience, Alex, if you've been brought up in an environment where you've been highly critical, your parents have been highly critical, or your guardians or your teachers have been highly critical, highly judgmental, and comparing you with others, this almost corrupts the way you think about yourself. As a child, we are very codependent. We want to really please and get the praise of our adults, guardians, and people who look after us. And so when they say things like that to us, that you're not as clever as your brother or your sister, or look, even if you come home with 8 out of 10 on an exam, they'll be asking you, why didn't you do 10 out of 10? And there's proof that you're lazy, or there's proof that you're not working hard enough. But it can be even more subtle than that, Alex. And let me bring this into the equation. Sometimes it's not what people actually say to you. Mm-hmm. It's almost what you have perceived or thought that they're thinking. It's almost you're thinking what they're thinking. And this sounds very kind of a greyish area, but I can tell you this is equally as powerful.
So examples of that might be if a parent ignores you, or a parent kind of looks at you the wrong way, or a teacher kind of tuts you but doesn't say to you. Then as the child, we kind of read between the lines, but we also think the worst, that we think, oh, they think I'm not good enough. They don't love me. They're scolding me. They're criticising me.
And this is so important, is do not underestimate this. It can be as simple as a parent rolling their eyes and just, oh dear, and just shrugging their shoulders. And the child sees that almost like a dagger to their heart. And then they start to use that to build this construction of self-doubt. Well, I'm not good enough. And that's where the three lies we talk about, isn't it? If you think about the three lies, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy. It starts on that foundation. And that's why the golden thread process that we use, this self-inquiry, to go back to the foundations of this problem, because until you can understand the foundation of the problem and be able to analyze it for what it really is, you'll never be able to solve it, because for a lot of my clients, it can be so kind of nebulous, so hard to get a hold of. For some of my clients, it's dead obvious, they've been beaten, they've been verbally beaten, they've been physically beaten. It's dead obvious. But for a lot of my clients, it's a lot more nebulous. It's an action of a parent or an action of a teacher, and it's how they've interpreted that.
And when that part of our mind we call the inner child has that self-critical, self-loathing narrative going on in our mind, sometimes it can seem like it's almost the voice of the parent, the voice of the teacher, the voice of the person who laughed at me or when I was younger. Is it almost like does the inner child almost like mimic, like a parrot, back to us?
That's so true. And that's so important to say, Alex, because as you grow older and in your mature years, that inner voice, that inner child voice can almost be the voice of the parent speaking to you. So why that happens is when you're a child and you are codependent and you put all of the authority and the jurisdiction onto your parents or your teachers or your guardians, what you're doing is trying to please them. You're constantly trying to reach their standards, reach their, I call it the high bar, like in athletics, when you set a high bar, you're always trying to reach that high bar. And as you get older, it becomes almost like a self-perpetuating, a self-fulfilling, I think you call it a confirmation bias, that one part of you almost becomes the parent speaking through the inner child, driving you. And a lot of my clients will say, I need to be driven, Alex. I need to be driven, because if I'm not, I could be lazy. I may not reach my true potential.
Yeah. But again, do you think that someone using CCJ, so criticism, being harsh on themselves as a motivator, and then saying, well, I've got to do this because if I don't, I'm lazy, I'm useless, I'm rubbish, I'm not good enough. But again, do you think that's them just repeating the voice of the parent or the teacher? They're still, the logic they're explaining to you is still faulty logic, almost repeating back what they've heard someone say in their childhood or what they've assumed someone important thinks about them.
And that's why, if this applies to you, I would really strongly suggest you look in the archives and you go back to the inner child work. We've done several videos on this, because what you're saying is absolutely right. The inner child voice almost becomes the voice of the aggressor. It's very critical of you, very judgmental about how you are, how you look, the things you do, and will constantly compare. Because the inner child has almost been consumed, believing that the course of this, the source of this, the foundation of this, what I call the first domino, is correct. And so they take that as their starting position. This first critic is correct. And then it becomes a logical kind of progression. It all makes sense. And that's why the golden thread is so important. The way to go back in your thoughts to the first source. The Chinese call it the fountainhead, the very beginning. Where did this start? And that's what we in our model call the vow. So powerful, this vow that you say to yourself when somebody's criticizing you when you were a child, when somebody was constantly comparing you, when you couldn't reach those standards. And that inner voice said to you, well, it must be me. You don't question them, you question yourself. And then you do this complication that we're trying our best to explain. that as you grow older, that inner child almost becomes a critic of you as the adult, and you can't please them. You can't placate them. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how well you go. It will always be finding fault. It will always be looking for the worst case scenario. It will always be doing this. You'll never have this balance and harmony because you'll always have this inner conflict and fight.
And that vow you talk about, that childhood vow, we have done a full-length teaching on that, and I will put a link to that particular teaching in the show notes if you're interested. So, as you say, the link between us self-loathing, self-criticizing, hating ourselves as an adult now can be traced right back through self-inquiry, through doing the golden thread process that we teach on many of our teaching videos, traced right back to one incident or a series of incidents with someone important to us in our life when we were a child. But why is it, David, that I can see as a child we would never doubt that senior person, that important person in our life, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a carer, an older brother, an older sibling. We looked up to them. We looked for guidance from them. So we doubted ourselves, like you say, the vow, we make the vow rather than doubt that person. But now we are an adult. Now we have more life experience. Now we are hopefully more emotionally mature, emotionally aware. And that individual may not even be alive. Why is it we continue with this same narrative and the same belief? So we have that direct connection between what we're doing now, the self-criticism now, and what happened then. And it's still so very much alive in our mind. Despite everything, why is that?
Well, this is such a good question. And this is when I suggest this to my clients, they will always laugh and they will always push back on me. But we hold on to it because we perceive it to be, there's a benefit in it.
Okay.
So we perceive a benefit in being so harsh on ourselves, in being criticizing ourselves, in comparing ourselves. There will always be a benefit. Now, if this is you and you're watching me, I can almost bet you roll your eyes just and go, there can be no benefit in this. There can be no benefit in me hating myself, in self-loathing, in punishing myself constantly, in never being happy. But I will tell you, there will be, maybe perverse, but there will be a benefit that part of your mind that we call the inner child sees in your actions and what is creating this internal conflict.
So I'm dying to know, what does the inner child perceive to be the benefit?
Well, as a generality, it's slightly different to every client, but as a generality, the child part of your mind has come to a very childlike conclusion. Remember in those videos we've done, if you look back in the archives, the child will always see things very black and white. Yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong, just, unjust. It's very extreme. We call it the emotional pendulum. And there's two extremes, like a plus and a minus on the two extremes of the emotional pendulum. So what the inner child has done is to come up with a kind of a solution to this problem when it encountered it as a child. And the solution is, if I'm perfect, if I'm slightly superior to other people, if I'm better than other people, if I can do things quicker, easier, more effective, if I'm more successful. So again, you see what the inner child is doing is raising the bar every time it thinks. So the benefit is, if I am this perfect person, then nobody will criticize me, will they? Everyone would love me. Everyone will adore me. They'd be in awe of me. Nobody would ever be able to criticize what I'm doing, or me, or my size, or what I'm eating, or how I'm working, or the job that I'm doing, or the way I'm raising my children. because I would be the perfect mother, wouldn't I? I'd be the perfect worker at work. I'd be the perfect husband or the perfect wife. I'd be the perfect father. I'd be stronger. I'd be happier. Everything I do, I would do well. And so the child sees this as the benefit. If they were slightly superior, and I always love what one of my clients said was when this clicked to him, he said, "You're right. I just want to be on a pedestal. Not too high," he said. "I don't want to lord it over people." I just love that expression. I don't want to lord it over people, but I just want them to kind of appreciate me, to see me as someone that is above criticism, above being judged, above comparing.
And I guess that pedestal, the inner child, our inner child perceives that pedestal as being a place of emotional safety. And that if I'm not on that perfection pedestal, I'm emotionally vulnerable. I'm emotionally unsafe because those lions are prowling, those lines of other people criticizing me, the lines of people judging me harshly, of people talking about me behind my back. They are going to be prowling, and the only safe place is up on that pedestal of perfection.
That's right. So when you got the pedestal, then to support the pedestal is exactly what you've said. Then the inner child will support the pedestal with that belief system that when I'm on the pedestal, everyone will be in awe of me and I will be emotionally safe and I will be protected, almost like a utopian world where everybody agrees with me, everything goes the way I want it, how I want it, when I want it. You see what I said earlier? It's like a childlike state of seeing the world. But there's the benefit. And until you understand how that relates to you, because it will be variations on that benefit, but how that relates to you, you will not be able to solve this problem, because you've got to be able to do that introspection, that going back, that self-inquiry work that we call the golden thread process that we demonstrate on many videos. And you go back and you find that first belief, because that's the first domino that affects all the others.
And when you say first belief, you mean the first time we said to ourselves, I'm not good enough.
There's something wrong with me.
There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I can't manage.
So that's the next one. So let me be clear. The first vow will be something sounding like, there is something wrong with me. Not what I'm hearing may be wrong, not what they're saying may be wrong, or not what I'm perceiving they're saying may be wrong. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
So what you've done, you've made it very personal.
You've turned it in on yourself.
That's right. And there's the inner child when you make it personal. So when somebody says, you could have, remember I used that example of 8 out of 10? When somebody says, well, you've only got 8 out of 10. Why didn't you get 10 out of 10? What the child does, it makes it personal on them, not on their ability to do math or English or science. They turn it personal on them. And there's where you say, it must be me. So if you've ever said that to yourself, then you have this vow. And you have to go back to that vow. And the Wu Wei Wisdom process is to deconstruct that vow, bring it to the surface, be able to look at it logically, openly, without any confusion, to see, is there a benefit there that gives you? Is this benefit of being on a pedestal, emotional safety, is that real? Because I would say there is no such thing as emotional safety. How can there be? I'm going to repeat this. There is no such thing as emotional safety. How can there be if you are the creator of your emotions? How can you be safe from emotions that only you create?
Yeah.
And there's the carousel of despair that we talk about. Once the child doesn't understand that, they're stuck on the carousel going round and around and around. And I know many of you kind of laugh when I say, stop. You have to stop it. But this is so important, because if you're stuck on that carousel, you're just going round and around and you're not stopping, stepping off the carousel and then looking at it from a different point of view. If you're stuck on this perfection, I've got to be better, I've got to do more, I want to be emotionally protected, I do worry about what other think of me, I've got to please people, I'm always doubtful, I'm criticizing myself, I'm beating myself up, you're on the carousel.
And I think I wanted to go over with you that point you made, because it's so important about making things personal, because a lot of people, I think, misunderstand this. We do make mistakes. If a parent, when we were a child, told us off because we may have done something really inappropriate, that doesn't mean to say that we didn't do something really inappropriate and that we shouldn't have been kind of told off in some shape or form by a parent. We will make mistakes, we will do things wrong, we will do things that we shouldn't have done all throughout our life, because we're human, we're not perfect. But when you say making things personal, you're making a distinction saying, we then say, all of me is a bad person, all of me is unlovable, I'm fundamentally not good enough. We take our individual misdemeanors, if you like, or mistakes or learning experiences.
Or life lessons.
Or life lessons.
That's what we call them. They should be called life lessons.
Yeah, and then we make it personal.
That's right.
And our inner child, because the inner child is very black and white in how, like any child sees things in extremes, we take one incident or series of incidents where we may have made mistakes, we may have encountered life lessons, and we take it to the extreme. And that's when the self-doubt and the self-hating and the self-criticism begins.
That's right, Alex, because again, if you go back to the pendulum, plus or minus, well, if it's not you, it has to be me. So when we receive as a child criticism about, as you say, you could have done better there, the child definitely sees that as personal, rather than looking at it as a skill or a life lesson or something that they have to improve on or they can improve on, or to understand why they're not understanding that problem, that situation, that piece of English, why they're finding it difficult to spell or to punctuate or to do math. See, what they then say, and again, ask yourself if you said this, oh, it's me, I'm bad at maths, I'm bad at English, I'm bad at sciences, I'll never be able to do this. And you see what the child does? Puts it personal onto him. And then he starts to be judgmental about himself, rather than, I know you wouldn't say this, but just to make the point, I'm awesome, I need to learn more about math.
And you know what, David, that's just reminded me of a point you make on a lot of teachings about being mindful of our language, because it can be easy and we can think, oh, it doesn't mean anything, I'm only saying it to myself. But once we start saying things like, oh, I'm bad at this, I'm useless, oh, I'm rubbish, we may say it to ourselves in a kind of flippant, passing way. But my goodness, those words, that self-talk has an energetic weight which starts to anchor us down.
Well, it goes back to the Taoist teaching. The words you use are the bricks that build the house that you live in. So as you said, when you're constantly saying, I'm no good at this, I'm really sensitive, I can't cope, I'm not good enough. You see, you're building this house, this structure that you're living in. You're building the prison that we call it in our model. You're building the prison, you're putting the bars up, you're locking the door, and you're imprisoning yourself in this prison. And this is why these life lessons are so important, particularly if when you're hearing me and you get a little resistance. That's particularly good, because then you can sit down, pause the video and say, so why do I disagree with David on this one? What's my point of view on this? Where do I think this came from? Why do I now believe that I'm not good enough? I would almost say the majority of my clients, we work on that thing. They'll come, we do the golden thread, why, and it comes down, well, I'm not good enough. And I go, well, where's the evidence? And I've been doing this job for 40 years. and no one has given me the evidence, the starting position. They'll give me the result of believing they're not good enough. Of course, they'll give me that till day follows night. They'll tell me all the reasons that happens when you believe you're not good enough, but they won't tell me. I say to them, and I'll say to you, were you born not good enough? And they'll laugh and they'll go, of course not, that's ridiculous. And I say, so when from birth, did you become not good enough? What happened? When was that point that you made that decision that you wasn't good enough? And that's what I would call the first domino. And that's where we started this discussion. That will normally be someone said or something I perceived about the way they treated me. And it'll be like, well, it would be my parents, for instance, just a person I'm working with now will say, well, if I was good enough, my mother wouldn't have treated me in that way, would they? Well, there's nothing to do with you. It may be what she was going through, it may be her problems.
Yeah.
But the child of being 6 has now made it personal. Well, my mother, isn't it natural, this is what the client says, isn't it natural for mothers to love their children? My mother didn't love me.
And also unconditionally
Absolutely.
at every single moment. And if they don't, then there's got to be something wrong with me. It can't be wrong with them.
Exactly. You see, that's a perfect example. So that was the conclusion that they came to. We figured it out about 6 years old, that he figured out that his mother didn't love him because of the way she acted compared with other mothers. And then he said, well, it can't be her, can it? Because she's my mother. So therefore, childlike, it must be me. There's something wrong with me. And she was also a very critical mother. So therefore, the next logical progression, it must be because I'm not good enough. And then they start to build their story on that foundation.
So it's, from what you're saying, the very first step in stopping this self-hating, self-criticism habit is going back to the original incidents or incidences in childhood.
I think it's the only permanent way to do it. I know other therapists offer other models, hypnotherapy and NLP. But for me, I believe to make a permanent job of it, you have to go right to the core, right to the first domino, because it's the saying that I say in all the videos, you cannot change what you don't understand. So the process that I go through with my clients is a deconstruction. And you can do this for yourself. You don't need me. We give you all the tools on these videos, and you can go through and you can deconstruct what you believe, why you believe it. Isn't that simple? What could be simpler than that? What do you believe? So if it's I'm not good enough, why do you believe you're not good enough? If it's I can't cope, I believe I can't cope, David. Why do you believe you can't cope?
So if a client comes to you and says, I absolutely hate myself because I'm useless at relationships, I'm just not lovable, you would then work with them to get back to the original, the first time, the fountainhead in their childhood, when they first believed that, and to deconstruct that and to look at it, look at the dynamic between them as the child and, say, the parent or the teacher or the older sibling and what happened in that incident. But what if, because I know some people ask us this, what if I'm doing this work for myself and I can't remember the original incident? Is that true? Would we always remember it, or is it essential to remember it?
No, it's not essential to remember the incident, but it is, you will remember the environment or the situation that you were placed in, because it is important to go back to that. And I agree with you, a lot of my clients, that's why they come to me for a couple of sessions, because they've set up a program where they don't want to go back there. Then they will use words like, well, I'm scared. It's like opening Pandora's box. It's like going into a room. I'm going to let go of all these old memories, and then I won't be able to cope. So you see all of these become a self-fulfilling prophecy again to keep you away. But again, I've been doing this for so long. I've always say this on all the videos. When I get down to the inner child, I've never found a monster or a devil or a demon or an evil spirit or somebody who wants to kill you. I found a scared little child locked in a dark room that needs to be sat down with, held their hand and to talk to and to slowly educate them, to bring them out of this pattern. Because this is another important thing. We talked about the benefit and we talked about what are the benefits. But here's another big benefit of not wanting to change: familiarity. It's very familiar. Lots of my clients will say it's easier. Have you said this? I can't change. It's easier. I might as well just say that about myself. I might as well just beat myself up. It's easier. It's easier to do it. But what you're actually saying is not easier. It's familiar. And that gives you a benefit. So rather now than doing the work, rolling up your sleeves and getting stuck in and making sure you're building your life on very strong foundations, what I would call Shen, truth, honesty, integrity, something where you honor yourself, something where you never lie to yourself, particularly in your self-talk. And as you said earlier, Alex, there's a lot of people would say, well, I'm saying it to myself. It doesn't really matter, does it? Yes, it does matter. It does matter because you're betraying yourself and you're doing yourself even more harm. And this is why this teaching is so important. You've got to stop it now. You've got to draw a line. And I know it's difficult. I accept it's difficult to get out of those familiar tracks. But somehow you've got to say to yourself, stop now. Stop this.
So if we do this work, we get down to the original environment or in the particular incidents when we were a child, where we made the vow to ourselves. And you say, typically we will find a scared inner child who is making the choice to keep on criticizing, to keep on hating, to keep on loathing because it's easier. What do we need to say to our inner child to begin to undo these choices?
You need to speak to the inner child with truth, honesty, and integrity. You need to be able to answer the inner child's questions because the inner child is stuck. So typically, I'm just going on somebody I worked with just yesterday. We did the golden thread over a couple of sessions. We got down to the child. We started to open up the conversation with the child. And the biggest problem that this child had is that they did not believe that they created their emotional feelings. Now, the adult part of the mind absolutely accepted it. My client absolutely accepted it. He used to laugh and say, of course you create your emotions. They don't float around the room. They don't attack you. Of course, every emotion he almost was dismissive. But actually, to his surprise, and he said later, when we got down to speaking to the inner child did not believe that they created the emotional feelings. They believed that they were under attack. They believed that other people, even by the way they looked at them, could arrow emotional feelings right into their body, into their soul, into their heart, whatever you want to call it. And that's where you do the emotional education. You work with a child. That's what we're working with now. You do meditations. We've done lots of meditations on our channel that you can convince the inner child. You can listen to how the inner child wants to come back and say, no, I don't create them. They do float around the room and attack me. And you can work with the inner child. And as I always say in these videos, the way to work with the inner child is to understand that the inner child is not stupid. They may be stuck. They're definitely willful, maybe even stubborn, but they're not stupid. So once you can open up the conversation and start to educate them, they start to blossom. I like what the Chinese say, like the lotus blossom opening. So once you shine the sunlight of truth, honesty, and integrity, the lotus blossom opens.
And so, in addition to teaching our inner child that these painful red light emotional feelings that you may have experienced as a child and that you're experiencing now, we need to teach the child that we create those because
Created
of
the feelings, not the situation.
the emotions, the feelings, but through what we think and we believe. Because as a child, when we didn't have the awareness, we believe that these feelings came from our parents because they criticized us because we were a bad person, or these feelings came from this situation where I did wrong and I failed at my exams, and that created the exams failure, created the emotions. So in addition to educating our inner child on that point, do we also need to, I guess, emotionally educate the inner child around the belief that our parents were perfect, our teachers were perfect, and that everything they said was the truth? Because that's a lot of it has come from that as well, hasn't it?
Well, strange enough, Alex, no, because most inner children have already been very particular. And again, if this is you and this relates to you, you did not believe every word that your parents told you. You've already rejected quite a lot of the stuff that they've told you, but you've held on to these set of beliefs because they form your story. So it's not so much that the belief that you're holding on to, it's the whole story. And so as we deconstruct it, then you can change your perception of your parents. So you can still love and respect and honor your parents. And this is one of the most interesting things. It's, disagreeing with somebody doesn't mean to say, because it's not personal. You can disagree with what they told you, but you can still respect them as your parents. I know a lot of my clients from certain cultures have a little bit of difficulty with this because they think that they have to agree with everything their parents said to respect them as parents, and that's not true. You can highly respect your parents, but you can disagree with some of their teachings.
Or you can still love your parents, but not necessarily respect their beliefs and choices in life.
Absolutely.
So again, we've got to be careful not to let our inner child swing to the opposite extreme and say, well, what you're saying is I've got to completely reject everything that my parents stand for, everything my parents said to me. It doesn't have to be like, it's about being more discerning.
And that really is the life lesson of this teaching, because if you think about the pendulum, the plus and the minus, really Wu Wei is in the center. And Wu Wei is a way where you take responsibility, where you look at things appropriately, where you make your decisions based on your truth, on your honesty, on your integrity, and you find that way through these situations. And so it's like, if you think about it as reprogramming, you're reprogramming your own beliefs, but you are the programmer, not someone else, not as a reaction, not as I think, they think, you think, I think, they might think, and all this thing, but as a very clear, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it. And so it's you taking this self-responsibility, self-love, self-respect. And this is far different to where we started this self-hatred, self-loathing, self-doubt. You see, coming back into loving yourself, respecting yourself, learning your lessons. And here's the Wu Wei and the life lesson of this situation.
And getting used to taking self-responsibility for looking within.
Yes.
And making decisions, is this the right choice for me? Am I doing okay here? Rather than the inner child's habit of always looking externally to know that, am I okay? Am I a good person? Am I lovable? We need to teach the inner child as a kind of another step in this process to self-refer rather than always look externally.
Yeah, that's why I like the analogy of the inner child. And as I've said in many videos, I like the analogy because you can think of that part of your mind and the thinking and the childhood beliefs as your spiritual child. Not your physical child, your spiritual child. And you are their spiritual parent or teacher. And we've got to teach the child, the spiritual child, not to look externally for value and worth and validation and approval and reassurance. You have to teach that part of your mind that we're calling the spiritual inner child to look to you, that you already have value, you already have worth, you already have assurance, you are already awesome. And you will make mistakes. That is not personal. That's the life lesson. You learn the life lessons as quickly and as effectively as you can, and you readjust into the middle of the emotional pendulum. And that would be the life lesson for this. It's about trusting yourself. It's about validating yourself. It's about giving yourself worth and love. And that's not selfish, but it is self-fulfilling that you can give that out to other people.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, we really hope you found this teaching useful. We've covered a lot of ground here. So it's about moving from those thoughts, the self-talk of self-criticism, self-loathing, self-hating, to find the original source, to find that vow. And then, as David said, to deconstruct it, to work with your inner child on what happened, what did you believe, was it the truth, looking at who said it to you and making a better, more healthy, authentic judgment as do they have the right to judge you? And then ultimately taking that self-responsibility to self-refer and look within. We've done lots more teachings on this subject, including many teachings on inner child reparenting and codependency and seeking external validation. And I will put links to those teachings in the show notes. If you enjoyed this teaching, please do share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. David works with clients all over the world every week by Zoom video call on these sorts of issues. So if you are interested in working with David, I will put a link to learn more about David's sessions in the show notes too. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.